Louis-Felix, we have so many places to talk about, and it's been a while, so I'm happy that you took the time today. One thing I've always noticed from you is that you're a unifier of people, right? So I think a natural place to start, we'll talk about your career, and obviously we'll talk a lot about Maine, is your ability to gather people in a room, physical or virtual. So maybe I'd like to hear about, what is that skill set? What is that drive that you have to, in terms of like being that unifier? How do you think about it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I've been a listener of the podcast, and I'm so happy that it's my turn to actually come and talk and have a discussion with you, and also have the chance to catch up. I think every time I'm asked that question, I think it goes back to when I was a Boy Scout as a kid, and I think I had always had this frustration as a kid when things were not moving fast enough. And I became sort of this guy who wanted to get things moving. So I would, even though I was not, say, the troop leader in the scouts, I was like going to each and every one to say, hey, we should do this, and try to create sort of a background movement for people to move so that things would move faster. And, I was a kid in class that had always good grades and stuff. And for me, the world was so slow. I was frustrated with that. But I also knew that the only way that the world could go faster is if I got everyone to move a little faster. And that became sort of my mission. I think in every job that I've had, and I've had many, different paths, it was always like the defining trait of my action.
Yeah, I
The
think
Boy Scouts.
I didn't know that about you actually. So like, we will talk about your skills in terms of tying knots. We met in the context of, creative mornings and obviously Mosaic HEC. And then obviously you went on to found several organizations. Having done this now a few times, like do you have any conclusions or, like lessons in terms of like people that, hey, like I think about community, what is the key skill set, right? Outside of you doing it, like I know you said it's been a natural skill as a kid, but any lessons for other people that they could take away?
I think the main thing, the sort of the secret magic sauce is you have to get people together to entice them with the idea, but to get a lot of people start doing things, real things, actual things fast. And then once the train starts moving, you can actually build the infrastructure. So you start with like the inspiring idea, we want to do this, but you don't spend too much time rambling about this idea and in the too strategic space. You come down to say, okay, let's do something. Let's do an event. Let's start something real quick, and then we'll figure out what it actually means, and we'll reconnect the initial idea, the initial impetus with the action. And I think that's what allowed me to kickstart a couple companies, a couple organizations, a couple event series, and maybe sort of a bit of a movement in the context of my current occupation.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to maybe double click a little bit on the physical piece, right? Because I've been in some of those events, that you held, like particularly, let's say, creative mornings, where there's definitely a magic in the room. I know you guys used the blueprint that existed to build it, but it still takes effort to gather several hundred people in a room, right? So I'd like to hear a little bit of, how do you think about that magic in the room, like the creative energy that gets fostered once you have people in a room? Now, obviously, it's part of what you guys are doing as well at Maine.
Yeah.
So curious to hear about, like any principles that you've applied when it comes to like the creative element. And then I want to talk strategy as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the art of gathering. Like there's a few books, there's a movement around this, but for me, it's like it's an art. It's not something you can actually plan, but there's some key components in that. You gather people, you convene them, but you don't own the mic. You have to accept as a convener, even though if you have your vision and what you want to achieve, you have to accept that the people coming will define a lot of what will be said and the value what will happen. So you have to, as a convener, to put yourself not in the position of promotion, of self-promotion or promotion of your ideas. You have to put yourself in a position of vulnerability and to share the mic and to share that vulnerability. And if that sort of sentiment, the authorization to be vulnerable, goes around the room, whatever the room is, physical or not, then you have something, and something is bound to happen in that environment. You don't know what it is, but if you're if you're there, if you're present, you can surf that and make the best of it. That's, yeah, in a nutshell, what I would say you need to do.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a little bit of like this concept of like servant leadership, right? It's like, letting others lead. What's the expression, right? A rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah.
When you thought about strategy for Maine, and we'll get to Maine and its mission, but like, was that one of the key pillars of Maine, like thinking about startups and putting them on a pedestal versus like yourself or your organization? So like, I'd like to hear you about a little how you thought about when you founded Maine, like the strategy piece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Maine started as a social, almost a social club of people running accelerators and incubators and learning to manage this new type of creature, asking themselves, how can we promote that way of thinking about entrepreneurship in a province that doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience with it. So it started as sort of assembling a group of people who were asking themselves questions, who were like trying to find the right perspective, the right approach, and sharing again their vulnerability, the points on which they were not too sure. So they were not there to share certitudes. And that, I think, that why I was able to be that convener, that organizer initially, and eventually become the sort of the leader, the director of Maine, was I was bringing this vision of strategy that is really well. If we want to talk about strategy, maybe we should start about the strategic environment. But we today in the the recent years since 2000, 2010, we live in a world that has been heavily strategized already. We stand on the shoulder of giants, and that people created through the levers of government, through the levers of big business, through the levers of social innovation. They've created these networks, these global networks. They've created the infrastructure of our society, and today we stand on their shoulders of what they've built, but we don't have their legs. We don't have their big arms to make sweeping moves. The only thing we can do is mobilize a half dozen people here, 100 people there, 1,000 people there, and try by changing the habits of individuals in a community, be it geographical or sectorial or ideological, and moving those levers. And that kind of strategizing is it's a new approach that we need if we want to make effective change. And you don't do that by just writing the big plan and executing it. The strategy making in that aspect is highly deliberative. And the lens that I theoretical lens through which I look at strategy, it's a discourse. And the discourse, it's not a speech. It's a sum of little bits and pieces of text, things that you write, things that your products say, things that your distribution choices say. And all of these things, everything you do in a company, the things that employees say between themselves when the CEO is not there, the things that people say, the users say about your company, this is all like this. The discourse is the strategy. And if you want to analyze the strategy of a company or any type of organization, you look at the discourse around and you seek, is there clarity? Because if there's no clarity in the discourse, either the strategy is unclear or it's not well executed. And I'm sorry for the sort of theoretical branching here, but creating Maine in an ecosystem that was young, not very understanding of the startup world, with everyone doing their things left, right, and center. Starting Maine was about creating a space where we can actually share opinions, views, and eventually build a common discourse around what are startups for in Quebec, what can they bring, and developing that common sort of discourse that we can share. And that discourse is the source of strategic clarity and at the witness or the indicator of strategic clarity. So it's a feeding thing. And maybe one last thing about strategy. I'm a student of Mintzberg. He's the one who's influenced my view of strategy, and we invited him last week at our event, and I was really happy to see him. But he said that there's a gap between your planned strategy and your executed strategy. So whatever you plan, something else will come out at the end of your 3-year process. What's important is the deliberate aspect of strategy. You can plan anything, but if you're deliberate about what you want to achieve or where you want to go, your strategy will lead you, as a blind man's stick, it will lead you through uncertainty to a result that maybe was not what you had desired, but that is still desirable. And I really like that framework of the deliberate strategy, but I added a little thing. It's the deliberative strategy. So as you go, you need to be able to get everyone on board about discussing what it is and why it is that we're doing these things. And that's really like the impetus behind a lot of things that I did, but also behind initially main was can we talk about startups and what it means and where that could lead and where we as actors claiming to support startups, what's our role in there? And that role is bound to evolve because it's a rapidly evolving world. And if we have that sort of open discussion, we can actually achieve great things beyond just discussing.
Yeah, I think we're gonna geek out on strategy for a while here. So it's like we're gonna nerd out. Like first off, like huge fan of Pittsburgh too. Like I've trying to get him on the podcast, but yeah, unfortunately, I think he has bigger priorities than little old me.
He's a neighbor. I can ask him.
Poke him, please. It's like, hey, there's this little guy. So I think if I summarize your thought, and I think it's very interesting. Like first off, I think your point of this notion of uncertainty, obviously it's very tied to strategy, right? Because it's like if it's something that's very well known, then it's not strategic. It's something that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and in particular when it comes to the world of startups, you're vastly going into the world of uncertainty, right? That's where there's so many stories of, startup A starting, to build product in this niche, and then figures out, hey, it's this completely other thing that's what's working, right?
Yeah.
So you're living in a world that's uncertain, right? So as I understand your point is like, well, you need a unifying purpose, one that might shift over time, but you need some kind of guiding light to help you throughout this process, right? Because you can't just be driving the car left and right, because then you're just pivoting all the time, and that's not going to help either. So how did you use that concept then for Maine, right? So then to build, its mission, even though, like you said, it's going to evolve. So I'd like to maybe start with what is Maine today, and then how you thought about its inception.
As I said, it started as a bit of a social club because we had to get to know each other and get comfortable talking to each other and sharing, what are my issues with my new cohort, or I have a call for, startup projects in my accelerator, but I have a hard time getting the right projects. And if accelerator managers get to share these things, they already create that sort of vulnerability space where they can actually start thinking about changing and becoming, better organizations, better leaders in that space. So that's how it started. And I think we're still in that world, but obviously from the social club of, half a dozen to a dozen actors coming together every now and then to the organization that we have now with a, Quebec-wide mission with big programs that we distribute through the ecosystem. Obviously that the scale has changed, but it's still the same idea. And we try to look at it this way. It's like, how can Maine help the actors that want to support, wish to start supporting startups in the Quebec ecosystem? How can we help them become better at doing this? How can we help them find their way, build their capacity? That's the first thing that we can do. And one of the ways of doing this is to actually, talk to them, get them to talk to each other, get them to, cross perspectives. Then the next step is how do we get them to actually do things together when it makes sense to mutualize resources, to think of projects at a larger scale than just, the startups in your specific tech sector that you establish your accelerator in, or in your specific geography or your specific demographics that you try to address. How do you create projects at scale So we're a tool for them to actually create something together. Or sometimes we'll arrive with the proposals to make these things. But the other important thing is that if we live in an ecosystem, and we actually have the ecosystem view, very few actors in the ecosystem have the larger view. Like the bee doesn't know the role that it's playing in the ecosystem, but the role that it's playing in the ecosystem is really, really important, as is the ant's role. And we don't want the bee to try to be the ant and the ant to try to be the bee, so the third thing that is really important for us is to bring that view of the ecosystem, make it visible. I collaborated on a project a few years ago. It was called Je vois Montréal. And for me, the idea that's like, if we want to help something become better, we need to be able to see it from the broad perspective and understand that, oh, I'm the bee. I'm the ant in that ecosystem. I'm the sun, I'm the CO2, right? Whatever it is you are in that ecosystem, you need to understand what you bring. And I think that's our sort of our third contribution to this ecosystem, is to help bring the view and comfort people, actors in the ecosystem, that they don't have to be everything to everyone. They can accept that it can be just really good at what it is that they can provide in the ecosystem, and will ensure that contribution is recognized to its full value. And I think by doing this, we can accelerate the ecosystem's development as a platform. We need to see business ecosystems as platforms. And my platform, my view is the Quebec startup ecosystem should be a platform, not just for startups to come and get, the coaching, the expertise, the money, the networks to grow. That's the first purpose. That's why we exist. But ultimately for people who have money to invest, big companies who can be buyers of startup innovation, companies who can be partners with startups in developing interesting products. So everyone, that even talent, what's the talent function of the startup ecosystem? So that's the third aspect that's really important. And I think you need in a business ecosystem to have one actor that has that view, and that's what we ambition to be.
It's fascinating, man. It's fascinating. I love this podcast just because I get to learn so much. I want to talk about the future in a bit, but I want to maybe unpack your 3 points, right? So like helping the accelerators talk to each other, helping them improve better resources, and then providing that view of like, hey, there's a community. We're not trying to compete. We're trying to collaborate. It's not this, zero sum view. How do you then, as Maine, measure success? How do you measure, like, is it then the quality of startups then founded from the accelerators? Because I imagine that's also their goal. So curious as to like, how would you then say, okay, what's our KPI? What's our guiding light?
Yeah, the $1 million question, literally. It's tricky because, and there's been some articles recently about this, but if depending on what you measure, people will want to score on what you measure. But when you look at an ecosystem and you only try to measure one thing in an ecosystem or a couple things in an ecosystem, we know if you look at natural ecosystems, if you measure just a couple things, you'll probably miss something very important that you didn't even know was important, and then your system collapses, or you start to see big failures in the ecosystem. So it's really hard, but definitely one of the things that we look at is the social capital that is being built in the ecosystem, and we look at it from a network perspective. So I think the best view is to say, how many points are there in the ecosystem? What's the level of connection between points? How many points are becoming their own little centers around which new connections can build without having to go through, calling Maine's phone number, talking to Louis-Félix and say, oh, who can I talk to? If the network becomes sort of self-organizing, there's value in there. And so there's the interconnectedness and the speed with which you can go from very distant points in the ecosystem that are, physically or traditionally distant. How can we reduce the time needed, first for a startup to, you start a company in Chicoutimi. How rapidly can you access, a cybersecurity expert in Gatineau today versus yesterday? And that is one of the points the point that the KPIs we try to measure are really network based. But after that, of course, we want to think about impact. So what impact does our action have? And oftentimes we tend to misplace the impact measurement with the activity measurement. So we can measure the level of activity. How many startups have we accompanied? How many coaches have we mobilized around startups? How many money have we put into startup? But that's not an impact, right? What's the impact of having good startups? And this is a little harder, and it's one of the challenges that we have for the coming year, is to actually really delve deep in this and think about impact measurements of the startup ecosystem. And that obviously goes beyond just the economic outputs. Because as you say, it's not a zero-sum game, but it's not an infinite game either. There's a limited amount of resources, from money to talent to, and we need to make sure, if we want to drive some resources somewhere, that we think about the actual impact on society at large.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a very interesting piece. I like how you think about it from a strategic view, maybe to dive into it from, let's say, more tactical or operational view. So it's like, how do you then operationalize this? So is it in essence, like we spoke about, your event from this past week. So I know there's events. Do you try and build, let's say, communities, like, thinking very like stupid idea, like a Slack for all, the heads of the accelerators, for them to exchange ideas. So then, yeah, how do you bring it down on an operational level?
Yeah. So obviously from maintaining good one-to-one relationship with, existing actors, incoming actors who say, "Oh, I want to start an accelerator." Like, whoa. Are you sure you want to invest the money and time that you'll need to be a well-performing accelerator? Maybe we can help you try to figure out what it is you really want to achieve, and maybe rely on existing accelerators, in which case we'll put you in touch. So we still do a lot of that, socializing, one-to-one, connecting people. Then, of course, there are, to achieve a bit of scale, there's the events. We have monthly meetings where we actually showcase things that some actors, we talk about accelerators, but not just accelerators, other support actors can come in and we can showcase what they did. We're working into building communities of practice to help. Accelerators are small organizations. They're really bootstrapped, financially don't have big budgets. So oftentimes many different responsibilities will fall on the desk of one program manager in an accelerator. And sometimes maybe, social responsibility or inclusion will fall on a program manager, but it'll be priority number 8 of a list of priorities in terms of what they have to achieve. So we want to create communities of practice where everyone who has a set of responsibilities that maybe is not top priority, we can get them together and help them, make that easier to achieve, make those things easier to achieve. So that's like on one end. So it's really like coming in and helping, or it could be, having common, acquiring a set of resources that we share among accelerators to not have the burden of each accelerator having to fill the same forms and things like that. So it could be that easily services to accelerators, helping the people in there, figure out their job a little better, a buddy system. So operationally, there's a bunch of things that we have rolled out and we'll keep rolling out over the next year and a half. And that goes also, if we go to the other end, the view. How do you develop the view of the ecosystem? How do you map something that's never been mapped? First explorers come in America and they try to figure out what is this thing, and then you have to go around, sail around, and draw the map and realize that you don't know how to draw a map. That's another thing, and the approach that we've developed over the last 3 years, we've partnered with MyTax, we've partnered with researchers in most universities, and we just started sending scouts around in the ecosystem to study the structure of regional ecosystems, the structure of sectoral ecosystems. So we launched maybe 20 different studies over the last 3 years to study different things, be geographical, sectorial. How do impact startups that have impact at the core of their mission, and they say we're impact startups, how do they differ? What makes a startup abandon an acceleration program? So we started studying a bunch of little moving parts to try to slowly see a bigger picture. And what we're working on right now is to have a systematic approach to studying regional ecosystems that we can characterize. Here's the startup ecosystem in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. We arrive there and we say, where are your startups? And they said, we don't have any startups. All right. What is a startup? Oh, it's this, and that. And then we started finding startups. And when our research was done, they were like running after us, say, hey, we found other startups that we didn't know were startups, but now we think we're startups and want to introduce them to you. So we want to start doing things like this. So go around from region to region, and from different key sectors, and assembling sort of sector specific view, but assemble this and have a comparative view. How does your region compare with the rest of Quebec? How does the intersection of your region and this sector? What are the opportunities? And we look at this from a qualitative point of view, mapping, understanding the differences, the characteristics, understanding the potential links. But we also start looking at it from a quantitative perspective. What's the economic impact of startups? And eventually working with other partners who have a broader view than just startups. What's the economic impact of all those investments in innovation? Because we talk about it like it's important. Oh, let's pour money. Let's make programs and invest in innovation. But it's like, what's the real impact? Does it just like change the problem from one side to the other, or does it actually bring new opportunities and create social uplift? So we look at economic impact. Eventually, we'll add other types of impact: environmental, social, well-being. So the next 3 years, we started like scouting around. The next 3 years, we'll be systematizing these approaches to try to cover the land as much as possible and to bring this broad perspective. And then if someone wants to come in, big bank, international player, new actor that's, starting a zone d'innovation in some city. The first zone d'innovation will be announced as we speak, and they know where they appear. They don't appear out of thin air. They set up shop in an established ecosystem, and they know what they can bring, and we can help them doing that. That's like operationally, it sounds a big picture, but operationally, it requires a lot of human power and brain power and partnerships with research institutions, local, regional institutions, and the one thing that I'll put an accent on: we're not just studying. It's research action. As we come in and start studying, we affect the velocity and position of the particles that we're studying, and that's deliberate. We really want to do this. We want the people to actually become more aware of the position that they hold in the ecosystem, and bring back to the first aspect, empowering them with the tools, with the networks, and with the allies that they need to actually achieve their full potential.
Yeah, I think it's a great view, Louis-Felix. So thanks for taking the time to explain a little bit how the sausage is made and your view of where it's heading. I'd be curious to see. I know it's early. I want to maybe double click on one piece you mentioned, like the measurement aspect, or sorry, not the measurement aspect, the holistic view. Are there any insights that you've been able to distill from like looking at it really obviously specific to the Quebec ecosystem?
Yeah.
Like once you're mapping it out, I know that you just recently released that report. What was the maybe key takeaways, from the work that you did, if you have any, obviously?
Yeah. Yeah, clearly. So when we started this, what we started doing was we looked at what had been written about the ecosystem. And we just like compiled this, and we called this the survol. So we didn't have any firsthand data, and our conclusion is that there is no one startup ecosystem in Quebec. That was the first constat. Like we look at this like, oh yeah, we talk about the startup ecosystem, but it doesn't really exist, right? As we can see through the data, it's not really unified. There's no the common purpose is not there. So we're like, okay, we still have a lot of work to do. And then we recently published a new report that's called the Incursion. So we really, as I said, we had scouts on the ground talking to people, trying to characterize how they collaborate with each other and try to bring out some aspects. And I think it reveals two things, and I'll let people read the report. It's pretty well done, and we have a sort of a highlights aspect. Maybe we can share the link in the show notes. But let's say that I'll share one key highlight that has two sides, and every medal has two sides. So I'm going to bring a medal. I'm going to give people a medal. It's like we've made giant steps in the ecosystem recently in expanding, and that's thanks to the help of a lot of actors, starting from the Quebec government, and the federal government is also very present. We made giant steps in establishing a startup conscience pretty much everywhere in Quebec, including Île-de-la-Madeleine and Nord du Québec, and that is good. That said, we're still sort of faking it, right? We're still doing as if we know what we're doing, but we don't really know what we're doing, and that can be read as a not so nice thing, but really I think it's very positive. We're faking it till we're making it, and we're faking it really hard and with all our heart. But what it shows is that we actually need to invest in capacity building and competence building across the province, and avoid what we read is we need to try to avoid of having everyone want to be everything to everyone. And that is really hard because traditionally economic development has been about building your local economy, your little industrial park, and trying to get businesses to start locally, grow from there, expand to other regions, then export. Now we're trying to build companies that their first sale will probably not be in Quebec. And we're trying to build companies that think global first. And we cannot afford, as a small ecosystem, large geographically, but small in terms of demographics, we cannot afford to say, well, you have to be in Montreal to create a startups. No. Your perspective as someone who grows up in Abitibi and sees a view on the world that is not that of Plateau Mont-Royal or Petite Bourgogne is very essential to innovation and bringing new solutions. So we need to be able to have these companies, created outside of Montreal, but they probably need resources that are in Montreal, in Quebec City, in Sherbrooke, in Gatineau. And we need to be able to actually look at our very broad ecosystem geographically and look at it as actually a very small ecosystem that needs all the resources of everyone around. And that goes against, I would say it's complementary, but it goes against a traditional economic development that we need to build, strong small towns with a strong, economic, priorities and develop local companies. No, we actually still need to keep doing this, but we need to add a layer of global first companies that are able to being born everywhere in the province and benefit from the impetus of everyone in the province from the get-go. And we need, it's reconciling those two visions that is probably my biggest challenge of the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that's obviously super important. Like, it was one of my prepared questions is like, how has obviously the pandemic has kind of removed very clearly, this artificial constraint of geography, right? Where it's like, you don't really need to be working in Mile End, to be participating in the, like that little
Absolutely.
microcosm of, of a startup ecosystem. How are you thinking about it from your organization? Obviously, you're thinking of supporting, the ecosystem that way. Then for yourself, has it changed your view of your mission in the sense of like removing that local component? Think, oh, well, maybe other actors will want to participate. Maybe what we've learned, we could help other accelerators outside of, our fake boundaries that we've created. So just, I don't know, it's maybe a blue sky question.
It hasn't changed. For me, it has actually accelerated a desire that I had for a long time. Like the fall of those boundaries, first it allowed me to hire people everywhere in the province. I have employees in Matane and Chicoutimi and, in Quebec City and Lévis, and I'm really happy about that. I was dreaming of this, but the physical boundaries were not allowing me to do it as easily as possible. Whereas now it's just like, oh, okay, we can finally do this. So I think the pandemic has accelerated this. It also accelerated something else. It accelerated, I think, the capacity of some players who had a little more experience, maybe a little more leeway to start exerting a slightly more dominant position. And we probably need this because our ecosystem went from nothing almost 10 years ago to sprawling, a bunch of new, coming, new players coming. I think we still need those new players to come in, but we also need sort more, I don't want to say dominant because there's this idea that it's a domination. It's not domination. We need some players who actually get the scale and international networks that we need for our startups to not just grow in Quebec, but like actually access international networks rapidly. And we cannot put that onus on every single newcomer accelerator incubator to actually have this broad international network. So this specialization, this sort of some accelerators becoming more like late stage trampoline to the rest of the world. I think that the pandemic probably accelerated some of that, while some others have found, are finding a different niche. And I think this has accelerated, and it will accelerate. It has to happen when you look at the maturity curve of any market. We're in that sort of trying to find our maturity while still being open to newcomers coming to solve very specific problems. And this, I'm very hopeful about this.
Yeah, no, it really shows. I think your passion also shows for the ecosystem of Louis-Félix. So I think you said it's early. I think at the one point I would probably challenge this. I think we're still super, super early when it comes to, like our ecosystem, even like you said, like, it's not that super well defined. And I think there's, like, I'm excited to follow you guys. In terms of the brand, Maine, you mentioned it before recording, like, like anything on that front, like how you think about Maine as an organization, its mission, how you see it maybe changing. Before we close off.
Well, we started Maine, a bit as a joke. I mean, we were in as I said, it was a bit of a social club, and we were sitting in a room at Notman House, overseeing the Saint Laurent Boulevard, which is the Maine in Montreal, and then Sylvain Carl said, well, we should be the Montreal Accelerator and Incubator Network. That could be Maine. And I'm like, oh, well, Saint Laurent Boulevard is there. It would be a great twist on words, but like a couple of months later, there's accelerators from outside Montreal participating in this. And then, obviously, French language issues, Maine became Maine, which is also very interesting. The hand is stronger than the sum of its parts. You can do things with a hand that you cannot do with 5 individual fingers. So the image was good, but I think we probably need to recenter a bit what we are, and especially what we are not. We've done this strategically. The next step would be to make sure that, as I said, strategy is a discourse. So everything you say, everything you leave, every trace you leave in the world must be coherent with this. And then we need to think about what Maine means to everyone, especially if we want to be a platform that is not just a network of accelerators and incubators, but an invitation for everyone who wants to play in the ecosystem to play team, to play with other people in the ecosystem. So I think we need to find ways. I don't know. I don't want to say in advance what are the means in terms, what are the changes we'll do, but we probably need to change a few things to make that clearer to everyone, especially those who don't know us.
And I can't wait. Well, and I'm also very much looking forward to being in person again.
Yeah.
Louis-Félix, I don't want to keep you around. This has been amazing as a conversation. I guess final question would be: is people want to learn more, connect, participate, be part of the community? What's the best way?
Well, you could visit our website, which will be part of the rejigging that we need to do, but still has some key information and access to, key data and documents that I mentioned. So our website is mainqc.com. So that's a good way of learning about the organization. If you want to connect with me, I would say I have a Twitter account and Facebook account and stuff, but I'd say LinkedIn is pretty much the go-to place for me. So you can connect with me on Twitter you can connect on Twitter, but on LinkedIn, send me a little message. Tell me why you're connecting, because a lot of people, send connections, and if I don't understand why you're trying to connect with me, I probably won't say yes. And then you can follow some of the things that we say. We're pretty active on social media, left, right, and center, as an organization. And feel free to contact me with any question, and I'll make sure to refer you. If I can't answer you, if Maine can't answer you, I'll refer you to someone who can in the ecosystem. That's what we do.
Louis-Félix, merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Nick. That has been so fun. Thank you.